Okay, we're now live.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to the meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee. My name is David Beeman, Councillor David Beeman, and I'm the chairman of this committee. And tonight I'm supported by a number of officers: Beth Howland-Smith, Barry Devlin, Chris French, Rachel Lawrence, Carl Hewson, Louise Fleming, and Kimberly Sohn. And in fact, the vice chair here is in fact John Reeney. Members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. Please can I ask also any questions get brief and to the point. We'll be timing speeches this evening and an alarm will sound when you're speaking for 4 minutes. Right, let's get on with the agenda. First of all, apologies for absence and substitutes. Kimberly?
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Brian Edmonds and Councillor George Hess, and also from Councillor Peter Isherwood. In substitution, we have Councillor Jerry Hyman, Councillor John Ward, and Councillor Stephen Mutliner.
Thank you very much.
I have Councillor Simon Deer here as well as...
Oh, apologies, and Simon Deer. I do apologise. Thank you, Vice Chairman.
Minutes of the last meeting. Can we please note the minutes of the last meeting held on the 18th of May, which are published on the Council's website? Everybody agreed?
Great.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that have been received from members?
Councillor James has a non-pecuniary interest in the Chiddingfold item, Chairman. Thank you, 9.1. However, it is non-pecuniary, so she will remain in the meeting as she is not predisposed.
Thank you very much. Questions from members of the public? Are there any questions received from members of the public? Questions from members? Are there any questions from members received from members?
We had a question from Councillor Brian Edmonds which was sent to the planners and responded to prior to the meeting.
Any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just quickly state that we have received a question from a member of the public, which will be on members' agenda page 7. This sets out 4 questions, and with your consent, Chairman, I'll run through the responses to each question A to D.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So, in respect of the first question, question A, members will be aware that part 2 of our local plan is in fact an emerging plan which hasn't been subject to an examination and therefore doesn't form part of the development plan. In accordance with paragraph 48 of the MPPF, although weight may be given to relevant policies in emerging plans, the level afforded is determined by the stage the plan has reached, the extent to which there are any unresolved objections to it, and the degree of consistency of the relevant policies in the emerging plan to this framework. At this point in time, very limited weight can be attributed to the policies in the emerging Part 2 plan, including the policy requirements in relation to energy efficiency. Turning to the question under B, the adopted local plan Part 1 in policy CC1 sets out that development will be supported where it contributes to mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change, including measures that use renewable and low carbon energy supply systems. However, Part 1 does not contain a Merton rule policy requirement which sets out a percentage of energy consumption which must be met by renewable energy. In respect of the question set out at C, the Council is using the Surrey County Council Vehicular and Cycle Parking Guidance to ensure that electric vehicle charging points are available for new dwellings. The guidance from the County Highway Authority is currently under review, and a revised draft states that all dwellings, and that's houses and flats, should be provided with an electric vehicle fast charging socket. On this basis, the condition is attached to permissions for new development requiring that all developments be provided with an electric vehicle fast charge socket prior to their occupation. And finally, turning to the question set out at D, I would advise that whilst the council as a whole supports alternatives to fossil fuel heating systems, it does not currently actively discourage the use of fossil fuel heating systems in new dwellings. Thank you, Chairman.
Very much. Councillor Dixon, did you want to say something?
Only that we missed that item, but now we've covered it, so we're fine.
Right. Questions from members? Any relevant nudges?
No, Chairman, nothing. Thank you.
Delegated powers? Any application of delegated powers?
So,
No?
those arrangements have been carried over, Chairman, so no, there's nothing to report. Thank you.
Right, well, we'll move on to the main items for this evening. First one being an application for public speaking, being WA 2020-0558, the land at the old Mission Hall, Hookstyle Lane, Farnham, GU98LG. An outline application with all matters reserved for the erection of 24 apartments with underground parking following demolition of existing bungalow at the old Mission Hall, revision of WA 2018-1879, as amplified by transport assessment, travel plan, updated ecology report, and amendment to proposed housing to include 7 of the 24 dwellings as affordable units. Presentation by the officer, Rachel Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll just attempt to share my screen with you. One moment. Hopefully you can all see the screen and hear me. So we have an outline application with all matters reserved. Proposal is for 24 dwellings, 7 of which to be affordable dwellings. As you will note from the description, it follows on from a previous application which was in fact refused. The application has been reduced from 39 units in comparison with that application. Turning now to the location plan and aerial photograph of the site. You will see, it's worth noting here, and you'll see from the images that it does fall within the built-up area boundary of Farnham. It's currently an industrial site with a number of industrial buildings contained within it. You'll note it's surrounded by residential development on 3 sides, and also by the railway line you'll see at the top of the image. And similarly, you'll see the same thing from the location plan, and the red line shows you the extent of the application site. I would note it is the red sight line on the location plan on the right, which is the accurate one. On the left, it actually cuts it off slightly, but the access does form part of the application site. Looking now at the existing site photographs, you'll see 3 photographs for you on screen. First of all, at the top, photo A, you'll see that is an image looking towards the residential dwellings on Arthur Road, which again you can see that just below on the plan just here. What's worth noting at this point is you'll see that there is quite a substantial difference in land levels between the application site and the dwellings which immediately adjoin it. You'll see that the ground level there in the bottom of the fence line does roughly align with the existing building roof line, which you'll see just here. On the bottom of the screen, the image is facing towards the railway line. At this end of the site, there's a slightly less difference in land levels. And again, you can see that it is an industrial use, and you'll see the number of vehicles parked on site there. A few further photographs for you. Top left-hand side, this is an existing bungalow. That is the existing residential unit to be demolished as part of the scheme. This arrow here shows you the approximate location of that. That falls within the application site line. The next two photos look towards some of the neighbouring properties which adjoin the site. Up here you'll see a view towards number 2A, and you can visibly see the difference in land levels between that property and the roof line of the existing buildings on site. On the bottom of the screen you will see a view towards Arthur Close, number 30 in fact. You'll notice at this end of the site that actually there isn't the same difference in land levels, and they're more or less on the same level ground between the two sites. And you'll see that that property sort of backs onto the application site. The railway line, for context, you can't see it too well on this screen, the photo isn't particularly good quality, but the railway line is sited on the right hand side of the screen. So looking towards the far end, this blue arrow here shows you roughly where that photograph is taken from. And just a few more photographs now, looking towards the entrance to the site primarily. Top left, this is the view as you turn off Fairgrove Hill to enter the site. This is the Farnham Marble shop you'll see just here, and this here is the proposed existing access, which would also form the proposed access into the site. Bottom right, at the moment that's where the commercial use starts and the entrance into it here. However, the application site, as referenced previously, does also include this existing bungalow which you'll see on the left hand side. And on the top right is a similar view to what I've shown on the previous slides. That again shows you some of the existing buildings, and you can see some of the residential buildings beyond that. Okay, turning to the application site itself. Again, I'd remind you that this is an outline form with all matters reserved. So the layout you see before you here is simply an indication as to how the number of units could be achieved on site. Here you will see that the units are divided into three separate buildings, each comprising blocks of flats there. You'll see there are areas of green space provided within the site. You'll see the existing access and the proposed parking. What you won't see on this plan, but you will see on further plans, is that a large part of the car parking would be provided underground level. So the ground level you'll see around the units is actually raised up in some places in order to achieve the level of car parking underneath it. Okay, looking now at the access to the site. What I have included here are some photographs of the access as exists. So I'll talk you through those. Starting top left is the view that you'd see if you're turning left out of the application site, and you'll see the existing railway bridge on Fairgrove Hill in that image. Turning to the middle image and across, these are images as you to the right of the application site if you were turning out of the site. To talk you through the proposals in a bit more detail, the proposal is to utilise existing access, however with some alterations. The visibility displays which you would see on entry or on exiting Hookstyle Lane are shown on the bottom left. And you'll see here it's necessary to take the visibility displays to the middle of the carriageway on the left hand side, and that is due to the restriction on visibility which is caused by the railway bridge. On the right hand side you'll see that that is able to be drawn and visibility is provided to the edge of the highway just here. This plan on your right hand side, where you'll see it's coloured in grey and green, essentially shows you some of the improvements that are proposed. So through the removal of vegetation there will be a slight widening of the access in places to maximise the width available. What is proposed is that the grey area seen here would be a shared use area available for use both by vehicles as well as pedestrians, cyclists and all traffic entering the site. However, on the green plan shows you that an area where there would be essentially a refuge area for pedestrians only to use in that space. So whilst it is shared surface, there is actually a separated area in part for pedestrians to utilise coming to and from the site. You'll note from the report that the width does vary according to the extent of driveways and buildings along that form. So the width of that space would vary, and the measurements are provided for you in the report. However, there is sufficient width there for a single width carriageway with some pedestrian space, including some refuse areas along that side. Turning now to the parking aspect of the development, you'll see on the top plan a sort of swept path movement. Oh, go back a bit. You'll see a swept path analysis there, which shows you how a vehicle will be able to turn on the site. And this section here shows you where there will be the entrance to the undercross car parking. And under here you will see the layout which provides the proposed car parking spaces. And that is sufficient car parking which fully accords with the council's parking guidelines. Those parking areas largely not be visible in line with, at least as per these indicative plans, due to it being positioned underneath the proposed housing. Moving on to some cross sections, and this is really to illustrate how the proposal would relate to some of the nearest neighbouring dwellings. In particular, I've shown, this plan shows you number 2A and number 6 Arthur Road. These each sit near to some proposed residential blocks. Whilst the layout is indicative, and this is just one example of how development could be achieved, nonetheless we have looked to ensure acceptability in terms of the relationship between the two. What is key between number 2A and this development is the difference in height and the orientation of windows on this property. You'll notice that the main elevations for each are to each side and not directly towards the proposed development. Officers are satisfied that it will be possible to control the addition of windows on this unit, and the main amenity space for this dwelling, although the garden isn't demarked, is in this location just here. Due to that position of windows and the difference in land levels, which is probably better shown on some of the earlier photos that we've looked at, there would be sufficient space to achieve an acceptable relationship with that property. Similarly, looking to number 6, this one is shown fairly well on the cross-section just beneath. You'll see that property sat just here. You can start to see, although the image is chopped off slightly, that actually the roof line of number 6 does sit in line, and in fact slightly higher than the proposed buildings or the blocks of flats just here. What you'll see is that it tilts and it angles away from the boundary of number 6, and it is in closest proximity to the garden area. Actually, there is some visual relief and some of these vantage points here from that side elevation of number 6 will be an open aspect of the site. Again, it is worth noting that the main rear elevation is here and not facing directly towards development. Looking down to the far end of the site, you'll see that this is the boundary of number 30A after close. At this end, there is not the same difference in land levels, and they do sit on level ground at that point. The distance on there is considered to accord with the residential extensions SPD. Specifically, it provides the 18-metre separation recommended. So that separation between the two is, as set out in the officer report, considered to be sufficient in this case. Turning next to the play space on the proposed development, there is a local area of play proposed, and that's in the top right of the corner as you see your site. Put a label on there because the lines are quite faint and not well shown in other respects. There is no local equipped area of play proposed on the site, and this is considered to be acceptable in this case on the basis that there are 2 other equipped areas of play within 400 metres of the site. And this aerial photograph actually marks out the distances here. Now, the distance of two of those play areas do fall within the recommended guidance set out by the Fields in Trust, and that is considered an appropriate distance for any occupants to walk in order to access that play area. However, again, we would remind you that there is also a local area of play proposed on site, and further details would be secured and required in respect of that at the reserve matter stage. We're now moving on to some illustrative plans for the site. Again, as referenced, these are indicative at this stage, however, these provide an example of the sort of architecture and built form which might be the form that the proposed stack would take. You'll see on this example they've utilised and picked up on the industrial use of the site at the moment. You'll see that's really using the chimneys and the red brick approach. It's also quite helpful at this point, again, to look at the comparison between the heights of the buildings and its surroundings. Visibility of the site would be fairly limited. Primarily it would be from the rear gardens of the residential properties adjoining that. In particular, you're looking at those which back directly onto the site, number 2A, number 6, number 38 at this distance. In terms of other public vantage points, first point, Arthur Road, just beyond this row of houses here, obviously you've got a number of buildings screening it. However, generally you can see that these could appear as an extension of the existing residential areas which surround it. Okay, moving on now to the determining issues for the application. First of all, the matters of principal and technical opinion in all of the application are highway safety and access. You'll note that there are a number of conditions recommended by the County Highway Authority, including section 278 works to secure those improvements to the access road. Loss of employment. Now there is a conflict with the Waverley local plan in this respect. The local plan requires an applicant to demonstrate that the existing employment uses on site are no longer in demand. That is normally done by a marketing exercise, however no such information has been submitted with this application. And so the recommendation for approval tonight is in spite of an identified harm in that respect. It is worth noting that there is no conflict with the Farnham neighbourhood plan in this respect. Whilst the Farnham neighbourhood plan does have a policy which seeks to protect particular business sites, it does identify a specific list of business sites or commercial sites to be protected. Hookstall Lane or the application site is not one of those sites. As such, there is no conflict with the Farnham neighbourhood plan in this respect. Turning to affordable housing, the proposal would provide 30% affordable housing. That equates to 7 of the 24 dwellings on site. And that is a matter that would be secured by way of legal agreement should the committee be minded to approve the application tonight. Similarly, in terms of the effect on the SPAs, a legal agreement would be required to secure contributions towards the Farnham Park SANG, and that's in order to mitigate the effect on the Thames Basin Heath SPA. In terms of the impact on air quality, you'll note the site is in relatively close proximity to the town centre. There's been no objection raised by the council's environmental health officer, and you'll note that there are conditions in respect of securing electric vehicle charging points and preventing the burning of materials on site. The matters of judgment for you tonight are visual amenity. Noting that the proposed plans are indicative, it does still fall within members' remit to consider whether or not a scheme could be achieved in an acceptable manner without harm to visual amenity. Similarly, in respect of residential amenity, I've highlighted a number of properties which are in close proximity to the application site. It is for members to consider, again, whether an acceptable scheme could be achieved without causing harm to those properties. In terms of standard of accommodation, you may have seen from the indicative plans that they are shown with balconies and with windows and generally good light and outlook to the proposed units. Again, this is a matter that will need to be further considered once at a detailed reserve matter stage. In terms of provision of a play and amenity space, it's considered that the play space provision on site is acceptable. Specifically, that includes the provision of a local area of play on site. It's considered appropriate not to provide a local equipped area of play on site, and that's due to the availability of other provision in the area. I do need to draw your attention briefly to an additional condition, which would form number 26 on the list. This essentially requires a precautionary approach to be undertaken for any construction works, and that's in regard to ecology. The condition refers to precautionary measures contained within the ecology report. Turning now to the recommendation A, this is just slightly updated to reflect that additional condition. Recommendation A is that subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement by the 27th of October 21 to secure the provision of on-site affordable housing, an off-site affordable housing contribution and financial contributions towards the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of Farnham Park, and subject to conditions that permission be granted. Recommendation B addresses the eventuality that the legal agreement is not completed within the appropriate time frame following tonight's committee. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Right, we have some public speakers on this item. The first one being Ian Jacob, who is speaking in objecting to the scheme. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Ian Jacob, as you said, and I live at 6 Arthur Road, immediately to the south of the site. I'm speaking for the Firgrove Residents Group formed in 2018 in response to the planning process for this extremely challenging site. The most frequently cited issue in over 85 public responses is highway safety. The County Highway Authority previously objected on safety grounds, but changed their position in 2021, which has left residents baffled. So we commissioned an independent report to back up what is evident to anyone visiting the site, that access to this kind of development via Hookstyle Lane can never be safe. There are more issues than I would have time for here, so I've circulated the points separately to the committee today by email and highlight 5 of these now. The blocks of flats will increase traffic by at least 52% on the current maximum use, not just from 39 residents' cars, but also because of the countless Amazon, courier and supermarket deliveries. The plans will introduce new pedestrians to Hookstyle Lane. A track barely 2.8 metres wide for much of its length cannot be safe for a pushchair or a wheelchair when the Tesco van comes barrelling past in the middle of the road, and no amount of road paint will make it safe for anyone, including those less mobile. Firgrove Hill pedestrians will be affected. Residents have countless stories from walking to and from school in town, and the entrance is covered in yellow markings because it's so dangerous, and it's in the middle of an accident hotspot. There's nowhere to hold an incoming car off the road whilst the lane clears, so any priority traffic light system will just block Firgrove Hill. And the displays spectacularly fail to meet policy requirements. They can only be allowed if those requirements are altered, as the applicant suggests. Now, highway safety is only one of a list of planning policy issues breached by these plans, and the residents we have spoken to are anxious that the committee properly records all the failures to meet policies if it votes to refuse the application. The planning officer's report records the many reasons for refusal of the first application, and correctly states the test now is whether there are grounds to challenge that stance. And 10 of the 13 original grounds for refusal were called out as still not addressed in the huge number of responses from residents, the Town Council and Farnham Society. These include that there is no good case for change of use. The site is not in the neighbourhood plan. The mix of homes actually falls slightly short of affordable housing policies, and all of those issues are recognised in the planner's written report today. The high density leads to extremely poor quality affordable homes that don't meet minimum requirements, and that's because the principle of this development can only lead to substandard housing provision. The scale and density remains completely at odds with the surrounding developments such as Arthur Close, Barncroft and Lampox Court, and the impact on neighbouring properties remains wildly disproportionate, particularly the overbearing, overshadowing and loss of privacy to the Hookstyle bungalow and the surrounding homes and gardens, including my own. There is no real prospect of good quality, appropriate outdoor play space in the current density of housing, and much of the designated area on the site will in fact be a steep bank. And these points are before you go into the lack of legal undertakings or the adequacy of the impact assessments on the Thames Basin and Wealdon Heath, which Councillor Hyman will no doubt comment on. The residents repeatedly state they don't object to the principle of improving this site, but the massive list of issues makes it obvious that this scale and type of development can never be appropriate on this complex and restricted site. The question for this committee is not just whether to refuse the outline permission, but rather whether all the reasons for refusal have been properly captured. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, on 4 minutes. Thank you very much. Right, we now have Mr. Boyes, John Boyes, the applicant, speaking in support of the application. And you have 4 minutes, Mr. Boyes. You're muted, Mr. Boyes. Muted. Muted. Muted still.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you. We're there.
Good evening.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor, for taking time to hear me. First of all, I'd like to just counter the objectors' points with regard to this development. It's been some 4 years since I first got involved with this, and that's purely because, as the owner of the old Mission Hall, I was approached by the owner, Chris Elderfield, of the industrial site, who, as a considerate neighbour, informed me that he had intentions to, or he'd accepted to sell the site to a prospective buyer. As such, I looked to try to look at the best options for this site that would avoid the potential use of that site for alternative reasons. Now, as you've probably seen from the site, it is a rundown brownfield industrial estate. It's in need of considerable upkeep, and it's beyond economical repair to continue in the use of a industrial area. The owner, Mr. Elderfield, is retiring, he is selling the site, and there'll be no continued employment on the site. I'd like to focus on the positives. We're providing 24 units there, 7 of which will be affordable housing for local residents, which will also be highly efficient, environmentally friendly. They'll have air source heat pumps, efficient glazing. These will achieve opportunities for young families, local residents, relatives of local residents, and also an opportunity for downsizing of residents of Farnham to free up housing, large family housing for families. There's also a considerable contribution in terms of close to £500,000 to community infrastructure levy and for the SPA Thames Basin contributions. There's electric charging points for all parking spots. We're providing 40 unit parking spaces, which is in accordance with the guidelines. And reflecting back on what the objector said with regard to the transport, which seems to be the main objection, now what that's done is we consulted with Surrey Council, we met them on site, they are in agreement that the access is perfectly acceptable, and we've revisited since this independent audit was carried out. And again, our highways consultant has agreed that it's acceptable and it meets all required legislation. The Surrey County Council have reiterated their original stance that the proposals meet their approval, and what it will do is it will take away the industrial use of that site. So heavy goods vehicles, various delivery vans, delivering tools, that trading estate is currently operating at 20% capacity. If it was to be operating at 100% capacity, there would be far more vehicles and environmental pollution in terms of noise, vehicle movements and hazards on that access road where it meets Burgrove Hill as an industrial unit. And furthermore, there's the access, and the keep clear sign is a prescriptive access at the entrance. That's purely the industrial previous use for that site. What the residential will do, it will discourage vehicle use. We can walk into town. There's 2 bus stops within 100 metres. The train station's 400 metres away. The town centre is 450 metres away, and it is a sustainable development which will give residents the their choice whether they do own cars, whether they can use public transport, which is in the local area and easily accessible. Hello? And that's where I'd like to conclude the my statement.
Thank you very much. Right, we have speakers from Farmtown Council. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, committee members. Farnham Town Council maintains its objection to the proposed residential development for 24 apartments, the old Mission Hall in Hookstar Lane. This area is not an approved development site in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan dated April 2020. Given the very restricted access, the site would never have been considered acceptable in that plan, being contrary to policy FMP 30, Transport Impact of Development. The sole site entrance is insufficient to sustain intensification of vehicle movement over 7 days a week via a single width lane for access to the 41 parking spaces proposed. Additional vehicle movement associated with 24 dwellings have not been adequately assessed, particularly so when increases in home deliveries are considered. The safety of pedestrians accessing the site cannot be achieved by sharing the narrow lane with vehicles and having no allowance available for appropriate separation. Those accessing the site on foot are thereby put in grave danger. Vehicles from Hookstar Lane emerge onto a congested Furgrove Hill in the vicinity of 3 busy sections. Visibility displays are just adequate on those two roads, but on Hookstar Lane they are critically impeded. At one corner, a 2 metre deep plate girder bridging the railway with a brickwork pier supporting the girder at the bridge apartment make eye-level visibility between car drivers and pedestrians impossible. In the other direction, vehicles are lawfully parked in front of the adjacent docks do likewise. Immediately alongside lies a busy pedestrian crossing, and the only Furgrove Hill footpath serving Farnham passes across Hookstar Lane on this very junction. Increasing vehicle movement here would be an unacceptably increased hazard. The land registry plan shows that the northern boundary wall of number 10 Furgrove Hill projects as a straight line eastwards to the back of pavement. The recently painted curve line gives no authorisation to the application site to enjoy prescriptive rights over that part of the access. It will in fact be harmful to the business owner by blocking customers' parking spaces, presenting a hazard to pedestrians on the pavement and to those accessing adjacent shops. Neither is the suggested passing point along within the ownership of the applicant, and it cannot be offered as mitigation for inadequacy of the access. Both presumptions should be discounted from the proposal. Although only an indicative reserved matter, the size and scale of the intended built form, the parking requirements associated with it, and the necessary vehicle turning space, together result in an inappropriate density of development of the site. This is not compliant with policy FMP1, new development and conservation, nor the Farnham design statement for Furgrove. It provides inadequate amenity space for the enjoyment of future occupants and will have a negative impact on the visual amenity of the surrounding dwellings.
If you can wind up, please, Councillor Fraser.
Shoehorned into a narrow sliver of railway margin. The proposed structures are a story too high, far too long, Analyst 521. The site could be better suited to retain its current use for light industry and thus retaining its classification as an area for employment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fraser. Right. First. No? Anybody? Well, Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I'm a ward member and substituting here this evening. I do disagree, as you know, generally whenever officers put states that the principle of development is okay, and that as at paragraph 14 on page 20 of our committee documents, that the decision, the approach must reflect the presumption in favour of sustainable development, because we know that this requires an appropriate assessment. It's not the fault of the applicant in any way. And paragraph 177 says that the principle of sustainable in favour of sustainable development does not apply where an AA is required. So you know, I have to correct that matter that's actually in the documents. But what I want to talk about on this is that this has been through before. There was a previous planning application for more homes, and this is a trimmed down version. And I think the question we have to ask is whether or not this satisfies the reasons for refusal for last time, because that's the easiest way for us to test whether this is good or not. Our officers say that it does now satisfy all of them, and they're on page 21 and page 22 of the report. So if members would like to turn to that, I'll try to run through them very quickly. I would personally agree, because I live very locally, that obviously this is going to increase traffic. I do have a problem with how Surrey highways are looking at this, and I think most people, I mean everybody that I've spoken to, I haven't met anybody who would agree with the position that Surrey highways have taken on this. We can't have vehicles reversing down a shared pedestrian and vehicular space. It's not 4 metres wide. The visibility display in condition 4 can't be provided. It's not feasible, and a queuing system wouldn't work. There is nowhere for people to queue. So this is like the backward point application, which was granted by appeal. For some other elderly members here people like me will remember that. And there's massive problems. We must not be doing the same in Farnham as has been done over there. A backward point, the problems that it causes. If we run quickly through the reasons for refusal that previously and look at whether they still apply. 1 to 3 are the highways ones, and in my view those have not been overcome. The refuse access, I understand officers are, which is condition refusal reason 4 last time. I think that possibly has been overcome. The officers say so, although I'm not certain. Number 5 is the scale of massing, and although that's a reserved matter largely, we do know that the affordable housing in this does not meet the national space standards, which it must. So the buildings are going to have to get bigger in order to create that. Logically, the reserved matters would be bulkier. And the amenity under number 6, under reason 6 from last time, the amount of amenity space and effect on neighbours, I don't see that those have been overcome, Mr. Chairman. Reason 7, the constrained nature. I still believe from this and from everything that I've heard so far this evening that this is an overdevelopment of the site. Number 8 is, I believe, and officers, I'd like them to correct me if I'm wrong on this, that number 8 no longer applies because of CIL, so that's not relevant. The refusal 9, of course, on habitats, we don't have an appropriate assessment. It needs rewording, that refusal, because virtually all the information in the bottom half of that is incorrect, all the references. I have corrected them before with the officers, but they haven't made the changes necessary. It's all out of date. Number 10 is appropriate legal agreement. That's taken care of in the conditions of the consent, so that would come up automatically were members minded to refuse. Refusal last time, number 11, was to do with the play provision. Officers say it's good. I think if all of the garden is a play area and residents are happy with that, I'm not sure I would press that one overly. You know, there are areas around where kids can go, but really, there's only, if you've got play provision for kids, there is no amenity for anybody else, and that's comes under the previous reason for refusal. And as far as number 12, the ecological report, I think that still stands, because as officers have said, in order to make it acceptable, then we would need extreme care, which basically means more up-to-date assessments when it comes to the reserve matters stage. Loss of employment, I think, is a solid reason also for refusal on this. But Chairman, as far as I'm concerned, I do not see. I appreciate the effort that's gone into bringing it down in size, but it is an overdevelopment of the site, and unless we get, I think everybody wants something done with the site that's sensible and nice, but unless we can get it down to a reasonable sort of scale and massing, we are going to continue to get problems with the access, and we're going to get all the other reasons for the refusal last time are just going to keep coming back. So I very much hope the developer would be happy to bring up some more plans with something a lot more modest. This, to me, is an overdevelopment for the traffic reasons. I think we just have to all agree that Surrey Highways have misunderstood the issues. I will listen to what other members say about this, but if we had an appropriate assessment, everybody would be waving it in my face and telling me to shut up. So you all know we haven't. We have to refuse it on those grounds anyway. And I don't see that many of the reasons previously for the last refusal have been overcome, Chairman, so I'm a little bit disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else to speak? Right, okay, right. Councillor Coburn, then Councillor Martin, and Councillor Hunt.
I couldn't agree more with Councillor Hyman. We did look at this site, but it wasn't 0.23 hectares, so whether or not the entrance wasn't included, because we didn't allocate any site for housing that was under 0.2 hectares in the neighbourhood plan. And when we looked at it, we actually wondered about an access from Arthur Close rather than from the road that this one's proposed, simply because we felt that the access was just absolutely unacceptable. Anybody who's parked there to go to Sun and Moon and buy their papers or some milk, I mean, it is just a nightmare. You don't really want to go there, and you don't really want to leave when you're there. I just think this is inadequate in so many ways, and Councillor Hyman's touched on most of them. As you know, I'm not a great lover of leaps and laps. I just like amenity space adequate for the residents that are living there. I don't believe because you've got Gossery Meadow and Marden's Wreck, that's acceptable. You've got roads, railway lines to cross before you get to them. I'm talking about a safe place space for children. And even Marden's Wreck, you've got to go over Arthur Road and, before you get to Searle Road to go in. I'm sure there are some pokey little bits you can do. But, we are talking about a level of build and a size of amenity space and indeed accommodation that is acceptable. And I just think this is overdevelopment of this site. I think it is cramped. I don't think we should be accepting things that are not of a high design. I've been trying to update the Farnham Design Statement's words, but the MHCLG haven't updated the MPPF's wording. But, they wanted to bring in refuse ugly, sort of accept beautiful. And it's all to do with design. It's all to do with, would you like to live here? Is this an acceptable area? And I just think by the time you've crammed all of these there, I think the access is, I really can't understand Surrey Highways. I think anybody that lives in that area can't understand them. Talking of splays, I mean, you have the railway bridge, I mean, you're never going to change that. You can't bend it a bit so that you can improve it, It really is where it is, and it is a very, very narrow entrance. And I just think for so many reasons that this is still not the sort of development that we should be given permission for. I can understand a change of use on this site. I don't have a problem with that if it's done properly. And I can understand some development on this site if it's done properly. But what I can't understand is this shoehorning in so much development that the basic square meterage is too small, that the amenity space is small. Everything is crammed, and it all relies on everything working. It relies on the underground parking or the croft parking, whatever it's going to be, actually working. We've got examples all over the Bourne where it didn't work, and there is nowhere else for the car here. You know, if we don't get the cars on the site, we have no other place to put them. So I think this needs a rethink. I really do. I don't think the standard of accommodation is acceptable. I don't think the amount of amenity space is acceptable. I think it's overdevelopment. I don't think it's anything like the developments that have been on that site before, which were not that long ago when the old garage was developed. But, you know, I just feel that they're still just trying to put too much on this site to the detriment of the existing residents, but also to the detriment of future residents on that site. We can do better, I think.
Thank you very much. Councillor?
I have to agree with Councillor Coburn and Councillor Hyman. I thought after COVID we would have learnt that people need amenity space for health and mental welfare. As stated, the balconies are small and the outdoor amenity space faces onto the shared access. I think that's completely wrong. I feel also this application squeezes too many flats into such a small space. As stated on page 35, a two-bedroom flat would only measure 53 square metres. That's well below the standards. I think it's the detriment of the people who are going to live there and detriment to the residents around it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt?
Thank you, Chair. So I completely agree with what's been said so far. I think, in summary for me, the fact that we're putting EV charging points and air source heat pumps in is a good thing. And in principle, it looks as though it is a site that would benefit from some development, but if it's not in the Farnham neighbourhood plan, then presumably it should be rejected on that basis alone. Despite what, as has been mentioned with the traffic, if you have a look at the access to that site, there's no way you can get 40 plus cars in and out of that site safely, not just with the actual kind of entrance and exit point, but also in relation to the bridge and the various roads and level of traffic that are surrounding it. So I can't see how they can come to that conclusion. And also, if it's true that the proportion of affordable housing is a good thing, but if the plots for the affordable housing are smaller, which I think was mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, than those that are being sold at a normal price, then I find that really unacceptable as well. So, in short, agree with everybody else. It's completely overdeveloped.
Thank you. Councillor Rubini.
Thanks, Chairman. Two things. I won't go over the highways issue again. First of all, the pollution. I see that we've got a lot of conditions on pollution, and I can see from 1959 it is light industrial use. Is there any history of what it was before? Is it likely to be heavy oil or anything pollution or railway stuff? Because it is obviously near to the railway. I don't know the history of this site, but it does concern me there may be pollution there. And as to what we're going to investigate, I'm assuming that under these conditions, an officer with that sort of skill will be looking over the shoulders when they do the investigation. Can an officer comment on that, or is it something we're going to look at as we develop it, if it's given permission?
I think, Councillor Rubini, we would look at it if it's given permission, I think.
Okay. My second one is perhaps an officer can put up the two areas for the children play area. I'd like to look at the way that the north facing, if it's north, how you get there, please. Is on one of the earlier slides.
Rachel? No.
That's it. Now, as was mentioned earlier, one of the sites is across railway and roads. I'm assuming that means it's over a bridge. Now, for young people to get to that play area, a mother with a pushchair, are there facilities, or how on earth do you visit that site? I'm not sure why it's counted, personally, because I think if young people try to get there, there are a number of dangers. I really am against that sort of distance and with those obstacles in the way for young families. Thank you.
Councillor Murray's.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of being boring, I just want to agree with the other people who've spoken so far tonight. I do think that as a neighbourhood plan, planners need to actually really take notice of it. It is a proper document, and it is very important now, I think, as well, that after Jenrick, who's not necessarily my favourite person, but nevertheless, he has said that he wants design to be a very important feature. And Farnham is a very attractive town, and I think retaining that, and the people who were, the person who was talking earlier said that, you know, the style and scale of this is completely at odds with the surrounding housing. And I think that's true. Looking at the visuals illustration, I know it was just a basic one, but God, it looked enormous and very, very bleak. The whole idea of people having to live there overlooking a railway line was not great. What we actually need in Farnham is employment. That's exactly what we need. We are going to end up as a dormitory town, and now people are wanting to stay more and more in their town and not travel. I think it's a wonderful place to develop what we call light industrial, but that could be artist studios. And maybe have a couple of, you know, housing places there as well. But as far as this is concerned, it's an absolute no-no. Thank you.
Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I agree with the comments that have come from this side so far. I don't want to go into all those again. To me, it does come back to basics, basically overdevelopment, misappropriation of the site. The Farnham Neighbourhood Plan makes quite clear, and it's a very considered document in terms of how to use land space. In particular, that area is referred to as light industrial, and I think it should stay for that reason, for the points that Councillor Miralles has just made as well. I would be concerned about the excavations that are needed, but I guess that's a technical aspect, perhaps not the immediate concern at this meeting here. But we have to bear in mind that Arthur Close, there's an artificial embankment there, and they want to dig on this site to put a car park in. And of course, there's the close proximity to the other embankment on the other side. So I'd have some concerns about that, and I'd be very concerned about the situation of the residents on Arthur Close, especially number 2 and number 6, which are close to that boundary, and they are the original buildings that were in that general area. I'm also concerned about the road situation, an accident spot. I actually got hit myself coming out of the station approach once, which is in that area as well. Someone coming out of there. So I agree that it is an accident area, and if you look at the records on that, a number of instances have been recorded on that. So I just think this, as I say, is an inappropriate application to be bringing forward, and I don't think we should support it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that I agree with much of what's been said. In particular, I'd like to pick up what Councillor Hunter said. I think there was much to be admired about the environmental proposals for this application, but I felt it was overdevelopment. In it's 3 stories high. What this would mean would be another block of flats. And we are seeing there are several blocks of flats around there, and what I would worry about would be the demolition in future years, demolition of further large houses, sort of flat creep that we see in so many places where the larger family homes are being demolished and taken over, because I think the impact on the houses on Arthur Lane would be very overbearing, and the diagrams that we've been shown, particularly the indicative cross section, shows how high these are going to be. So I really think the 3rd floor is completely unnecessary. It would be nice to develop this area, but I don't think this is the right solution. Thank you.
Okay, well, Councillor Corbyn.
Yes, very briefly. Sorry, Chairman, to come back, but it was just one or two people have mentioned the difficulty of this construction. And if we were to give permission for a development of up to 24, and then they discover they can't do the undercroft for whatever reason, that it is polluted, that causes a problem, they can't do the piling, they still want to do their 3 stories, and we've given permission for 24, then they all go up a story. So, you know, there are a lot of issues on this site that I think really do need addressing before we can really give it any permission, let alone, you know, the outline for 24, because I just feel there are too many unknowns at the moment.
Thank you. Well, okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, I have to agree with all the other speakers that I think it's a very overdeveloped site. It's not attractive. It's quite dominating to surrounding properties, I feel. But the 2 issues that I have, firstly, it's highway safety. I do know where the Elderfield site was, and it's a very difficult site to get out of at the very best of time. So that does concern me. One of the concerns that I also have with safety is the fact that residents have to walk along the side of a road which is extremely narrow, and if you've got a mother with a pushchair and little ones going along there, I do feel that that is a very big conflict, and I'm very concerned about that. The other issue that I have is the amenity space. I think it's absolutely appalling, the amenity space that they're offering. Yes, you can take children to a park, but sometimes a mother might want to have children play in the garden, and there is very little amenity space there. And also, as a wife and what have you, I'd be very interested to know where they're going to put a washing line, because it is absolutely appalling, and for those reasons I don't think I could support this. Thank you.
And Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. Even I have concerns. That's interesting. And it reminds me of the one in Godalming, where we had the underground car parking. Then we got, and it was granted, and then a viability study came in, and they couldn't afford to do it, so they wanted to reduce the affordable housing because it's a very expensive, and it does look as though they got to dig out there. And it's just a quart in a pint pot, because they want to get the maximum to make it financially viable. Therefore, by doing it this way, it actually is detrimental to everything. It's far too big. The design will only be awful because of the size and the quantity. Therefore, even I find it difficult to agree with the officers. So I do think this time I will be not supporting the officers, because it is just overbearing. It's too many houses, and even if they say that the light industrial use it is not going to be viable, it was going to be very expensive, as the developer was saying, then, you know, it can be single-storey office blocks, all sorts of things on an employment site. It doesn't have to be light industrial. It can be little offices, single offices, or even the old-fashioned, I think it was called something living over the top. You had an office at the bottom and you could have your flat above it. So you'd have 2-storey, you have business and you work from home. It's exactly what we need in this day. And as for having an access that doesn't have any parking bits, that's like the one at the top of Whitley, where we had to get those ones in, right on the top of the hill, blind spot. So I'm sorry, Chum, sorry officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we can now move to the vote. I shall put the recommendation. Recommendation A, that subject to the completion of an appropriate legal agreement by the 27th of October 2021 to secure the provision of on-site affordable housing and off-site affordable housing contribution and financial contributions towards the ongoing maintenance and enhancement of Farnham Park, and subject to conditions 1 to 26 I should say now, and inform us 1 to 6 the outline plan should be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against, please raise their hands. Yeah, I think yes. Unanimous, yes. Oh.
Chairman, can we make it clear for the benefit of the webcast, because people at home don't know and can't see necessarily, that that was unanimous against?
It's unanimous.
Can I propose that permission be refused?
Second for that. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, should we quickly run through just to make sure that people don't disagree with the pages 21 and 22 again? So, because if you've got stuff that's written there, it's much easier than everybody having to. And if anybody's got any additional reasons which weren't picked up last time that should be, though I think actually the Planning Committee did a fairly good job with what was obviously a even larger development. Number 1 and 2 and 3, we are disagreeing there with Surrey Highways. Obviously there's a possibility that that would be looked at differently in another place, but I think we have to go with what's true and on the ground and that we see, and if it went to another place that they would look at this properly. I would certainly want to go again with conditions 1, 2 and 3. The access and egress as regards refuse. Could officers please remind us what has been done differently for us to be happy now that that's been overcome on number 4? Do you mind if I ask that?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Hyman, for the question. We have had a fairly detailed technical report on this in order to show how those larger vehicles and refuse vehicles could be accommodated on site. I will very quickly take you through that. I won't spend too much time on it. Just 1 moment. I'll just show it to you on screen. So this shows you the cross section, and actually I think I've got a better plan there. Parking and access. So you'll see we do have fairly detailed tracked vehicle movements and plans. So I would steer members away from repeating my reason for refusal 3. As I say, we do have technical views, and there's a lot of technical work has been done since the last application to show how that particular point would be acceptable. That's probably all I've got to say at that particular moment.
Thanks, Chairman. I think the issue here is that, I mean, obviously, if refuse vehicles are currently able to act, full-size refuse vehicles, as you know, the ones for residential units are able to access the site at the moment, then it would be unreasonable for us, even though I know that one of the big problems is the refuse vehicles and other large vehicles driving into the Farnham Marble shop on the corner, because there isn't really enough space. Should I defer to Carol Coburn for a second, because she looks like she's got a pen hanging up in the air?
Sorry, I'm just leaping ahead to paragraph 5, reason 5. All right, let Councillor James go back to 3 first.
I'm sorry, but I would have to disagree with Councillor Hyman, because the applicant has demonstrated to the Highway Authority that it's satisfactory. What we're saying is he hasn't demonstrated to Waverley. I'm sorry.
Good point, well made, yes.
Okay.
Right. Where are we now?
I'm just thinking that if we are saying that refuse has been sorted, yeah, I do apologise. I must apologise to Mr. Boyes as well as residents, because this has gone on over so many months with so many faults on the side of all parties and COVID, that we looked at this 6 months, a year ago, and 2 months ago, and it keeps coming back, and I can't remember exactly what is in every planning document that I saw many months ago, and many of them have changed as well. And I've probably been through them more than most people, so I am relying slightly on officers being candid with us, telling us what it is of those reasons. Obviously, we do not want to be unreasonable and refuse on things that are, that we shouldn't be doing. But as far as the traffic ones, I would be perfectly happy to change, obviously, the reference to the Highway Authority, as Councillor James has picked up on, but also to delete where it says refuse vehicles, I do think we are all agreed here from what I've heard that free movement for service vehicles, cars associated, that it could be achieved safely. Now, if it was just bin lorries once a week going down to the site and back might be acceptable, but it's the whole development we're talking about, and that's why I think number 3 stands, even though possibly number 4 on its own as regards the waste provision and access and egress for vehicles alone. That's why I'm asking is, have we got it proper access? I don't think we should refuse on 4, but I think we should refuse on 3, but delete the by refuse vehicles if officers are telling us that they have satisfied the matter on refuse. I would disagree with officers, but we don't want to go to appeal on things. It's silly. If I'm not sure, I should not refuse it on that, and I'm not sure. If anybody else is, please let me know now.
Chris French, have you got sort of reasons for refusals?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, right, yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Barry.
I'm sorry, I tried to raise my hand, but I couldn't seem to operate the function. I appreciate the wealth of feeling against the County Council highway and traffic analysis. The law basically is that this is a statutory consultation raised under the Development Management Procedure Order, and we as decision taker, having sought the statutory view, have to give considerable weight to that view. Now I know local view is not supportive of the technical view from the county, but I would advise that the legal position really that we're in is that we have to explain in some detail why we do not consider the county highway view to be cogent. So I think the reason for refusal of the highway and traffic grounds would have to give some sort of heads or bullet points. We could frame our position around for a possible future.
Yeah. Chairman, may I do that then and add to that? Is that okay? Okay, well, as I mentioned, the Highways Authority is of the opinion that it's 4 metres wide down that path all the way, and it's a lot less than that in many places, so they are incorrect as regards the width. It is a matter of safety of vehicles reversing down or up what is intended to be a shared pedestrian and vehicle space when there are pedestrians there. So at the moment, we don't have a lot of pedestrians using that. This would introduce a lot of pedestrians. What we have at that situation at the moment is a lot of vans using that site, not millions a day or anything, because it's hardly used, the site is, but we do have quite a few. The majority of vehicles, it appears to me, from living locally, are vans, which can get out onto the road relatively easily because they're higher up, they have got visibility over the railway abutment. Cars won't be able to do that. So it's the specific issues that apply to this. The visibility splay, which is suggested in condition 4, but we don't put that into this reason for refusal, it's on page 43, is not feasible. So I think that should be stated, that the visibility splay for cars is not achievable. A queuing system is not achievable. No queuing system or solution has been put forward which satisfies which accords with the reality of that junction there. So, I mean, those are particularly the reasons that the width is. Surrey highways have got the width wrong, and I think it's important that we say that, because if they're assuming it's 4 metres wide, and we know they're wrong about that, then we do need to make sure that that's given as our good reason. We can't have vehicles reversing up and down a shared space. They would be required to. There is no facility there without using other people's land, which there's no right to do so. There is no facility there for a turn-in. So we can't have a queuing system, which has been suggested as the solution. There is no solution, and I think that's our point here. So. But I think as far as the roads are concerned, and also the history of accidents there, which local residents know about, whether they're reported or not to the police, but it's constant problems that are there.
I think actually, let's be quite clear, we're all going round in circles and circles here. I think the prime reason for, I would say, for rejecting this particular application is because of the overdevelopment of the site. And that the highway reasons, we have to acknowledge that, so are in fact the statutory highway, but in fact there's been a counter report funded by the residents that, but the primary reason is overdevelopment of the site. Yes.
Well, I was just trying to speed things on along the lines that if we can't really overturn what's said here because it's true, then surely we can put in as an informative or somewhere in our judgment that, we request that the site is measured again or something. So we're not actually throwing it out, but we are suggesting that we do still have some concerns because we're not sure that and also I think the point Councillor Hammond makes about the low cars not being able to see, it is one thing for a high vehicle to come out because you do see over the railway bridge, as he says.
Well, they've got a short nose, sorry to carry with that.
Yeah.
Driving a van has a very short nose.
It's a different matter, is what I'm saying, for a larger vehicle to get out. So just as a way forward, Barry's indicating again.
Yes, Barry.
Okay, thank you. I think we would be, I wouldn't be comfortable with us preferring the residents' report to that of the statutory consultee. I don't know whether it would be manageable, but perhaps with the guidance of planning officers, we could quickly return to that part of the report. It sets out the county view and state why we disagree with it, so that the planners can formulate the reason for refusal around that. Is that a practical suggestion?
I don't think we ought to be hung up too much on the highways report as such. I mean, okay, we've got a county report which may cast doubt in what the county highways authority have said. But I say the primary reason I think it should be the overdevelopment of the site. And anyway, but I mean, Chris, have we got any words?
Rachel's got it.
Rachel. Hello, Rachel. Sorry.
Hello, yes, I'm hoping I might be able to help you slightly on the articulation of some of these reasons. I've been listening to the comments that have been made from members on various aspects, and please do tell me if these are not accurate. I'll just start by talking about the highways ones, because I appreciate you may well want to comment in due course on other aspects as we work our way through. But if I can just give you a quick summary, and they are very loosely based on the reasons that you see before you from last time on page 21, but just altered slightly to reflect the circumstances here. So reason for refusal 1, I would suggest that from the sound of it you would propose that reason for refusal be carried over. That's about the visibility displays. In that sense, you could make reference to the fact that the visibility displays do go to the centre of the highway, not the edge of the highway. You've got 2 different views before you from the technical report produced for Fairgrove Residents Association and the County Highway Authority. I would simply suggest that you might want to add reference to the Farm Neighbourhood Plan Policy for SNP 30 at the end of that paragraph by way of a change. In terms of reasons for refusal 2 and 3, one of the largest areas for concern seems to be around pedestrians and the issues for them when they're going to face vehicles on that road. And actually both the technical reports submitted do acknowledge that there will be an increase in pedestrians and I suppose vulnerable users using that road. So it's down to your judgment as to come to a view on that. But based on what you've said, I suggest it might be appropriate to amend reason for refusal 2 to say it's not been demonstrated that a proposal could be achieved without causing detrimental impact on the highway safety for pedestrians using the shared surface area, and then it goes on to refer to the relevant policies. So that particular reason for refusal is focused on the area forward of the Fun and Marble shop and from pedestrians passing the site. However, a similar approach could also be taken to reason for refusal 3. And again, I would suggest that the focus of this is not about the refuse vehicles, as we've got quite detailed technical information on that. But again, is about the potential conflicts and the impact on pedestrian cyclists using that narrow access. that would instead read, the applicant has not demonstrated that the safe movement to and from the site by pedestrian cyclist cars associated with the development could be achieved using the existing narrow access way. And then it will make reference to policies ST1, National Planning Policy Framework, and I suggest also FNP 30 and the Farm and Neighbourhood Plan. I would agree that we'd take out the reference to the Highway Authority specifically, as it is our Waverley Borough Council making the decision. I would support Councillor Hyman's suggestion that we do not maintain reason for refusal 4, which is very specific to refuse vehicles. Those reasons for refusal would enable us to highlight points in terms of the width of the access. There was some suggestion earlier on that the Highway Authority has misunderstood the width of the access road. And I would remind you that further measurements were taken on that, and they are aware of the narrow width. However, that's not to say that in any appeal that we couldn't make reference to that width. I wouldn't suggest that it's an error that the Highway Authority haven't acknowledged, rather that you would consider that the impact on pedestrians through that width would not be acceptable, and that should likely be your focus, would be my advice. I'll leave it there because we're then moving on to different reasons for refusal and see what comments you might want to propose in that respect. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Should we quickly move on with the scale and massing under 5? I think everybody's agreed that that should remain, and I think the references are correct. I'm not sure whether it's paragraph 127 of the MPPF. That if we could just ask officers to check that, obviously before the decision notice gets issued.
Yeah, can we put FNP1 in that, because they're all repeated in 6, apart from the FNP1.
Sorry, Carol, you're saying that put 5 and 6 together?
Well, I don't mind, but if you've got 2 references to the other documents and only 1 to FNP1, and that's, if we are going to keep them as separate, then we just want them to both refer to FNP1, which is our key design.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Now, number 7 is slightly different because it doesn't have reasons for any of the policy reasoning, which surprised me slightly, but it's the one really that jumps at people who aren't sort of sticking to policy. It's having regard to indicative plans and constrained nature, haven't demonstrated that the proposed quantum of development could be accommodated. Is that also the same really with 5 and 6? I mean, scale and massing's 5. 6 is more amenity. They're amenity of residents rather than anyone else. So I'm not sure about number 7, and I wouldn't want to impose that if that was not an issue there. But officers might come back to that later. Number 8, the education. I questioned that earlier. Haven't had a reply. Is that taken care of by SIL? If officers can just confirm if that's taken care of by SIL, then obviously we wouldn't reimpose that if the SIL charges is due anyway. Number 9, it starts off with the first 2 and a bit lines. The applicants failed to enter into an appropriate legal agreement to secure a financial contribution. That is what we put automatically when if we're refusing. But in this instance, that is irrelevant because, as it says in National Planning Policy Guidance to it, which explains the law for us, we have to have. It says competent authorities must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures through an appropriate assessment. And that's difficult to misunderstand. We haven't got an appropriate assessment, and no one's waving it in my face as they would if we did. So we start with. Are we going to argue about that?
We do have an appropriate assessment, which was tendered to Natural England. And they were happy with it. And indeed, the facts here are analogous to potential arguments at a hearing, which would be resolved along the lines of the recent Amenity decision and the earlier decision at Park Lane, wherein both inspectors fully followed the use of the council's avoidance strategy and the deployment of SAM and the use of suitable alternative natural green space and the use of SAM monies for the monitoring thereof. The views of Natural England were preferred over the views of Councillor Hyman at the Warmead inquiry, at which he spoke at some length, as I understand it. So the fact that an appropriate assessment has been carried out, as I understand from my colleague Rachel Lawrence, that naturally they have seen that and are happy with the SAN proposal here, I think totally takes out that random refusal, and that's my advice, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, if that was true, somebody would put it in front of us, and we know it isn't, and we know that's what the court case was about. So
I mean,
you know that's.
I think we have to accept what our legal advisor just told us, very Devlin.
Well, we don't, Chairman, do we?
Okay.
We don't.
Okay. Right.
Speak for yourself, Councillor Hyman, on that. It's not we. I trust the officer.
Well,
okay. Now,
I'm the one who's looked at it, Chairman. If we go down through that, though, as I've said, that there are all of the references at the bottom of that there, because that obviously that refusal reason will stand anyway. So whether officers are willing to admit that the first sentence needs removing or not, that's something which we'll have to take up somewhere else. But it is absolute fact that the line which says accordingly, since the planning authority is not satisfied that regulation 64, that, and I'm sure our lawyer will agree, is inappropriate, because if we don't have an appropriate assessment, we cannot move on to section 64, and it's not in front of us, so we can't. On the fifth line from the bottom where it says regulation 615, that's 635, Chairman. It's the wrong, that's 635. Policy NRM6 of the South East Plan has been overturned by the Crondall judgments of paragraph 77. Paragraph 118 of the MPPF 2012 doesn't apply because the 2019 version does, and that should say 175A. Well, if we're going to refuse it, we've got to get the reasons right rather than get them wrong.
You broadly agree on the basis of the refusal for the application. And is that the wording? I don't know if Chris French could sort of come in here, but I mean, perhaps we could clear the wording of this particular refusal with the ward members.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm happy to look at the wording of Condition 9, so long as we're then Barry, Barry's.
On here, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Go on.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes. So, are we still on the issue of the special protection area?
No, we moved on, I think.
I lost I fell out of the link just now.
Yeah. All I'm suggesting is that we know, on the basis of the reasons for objection, I'm just saying that the wording of it should then be put to the officers to then agree with the ward councillors, of which Councillor Hyman is one.
Happy with that? Yeah.
Councillor Martin?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if an appropriate assessment, it's my firm advice to you, if an appropriate assessment has been carried out in Natural England, and they have agreed the package of suitable alternative natural green space and access to monitoring and management monies,
I accept that.
Whole ground of refusal goes.
Yes, okay, fair enough.
No, it doesn't, because they haven't entered into a legal agreement, so that's why it's in there.
Look.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's simply not a ground for refusal. If they are putting that forward, it simply is not a ground for refusal. Okay.
Prerogative. Reason 9 does not stand in my book. End of story. Right. Councillor Martin.
That's not what we've agreed for.
Could we have paragraph 11 in, please?
Paragraph 11?
Number 11, yes. The applicant has not demonstrated the proposed development will be capable of achieving appropriate play provision, please.
Yes, okay, I think that's incontrovertible.
Can I just ask, we're looking at bulk, design, play area, yes? Is that it? And amenity space. Is that it?
Yeah.
Well then, can the officers just do that for us?
Chris, Rachel.
So yes, do you want me to jump in and run through a few points? Just to clarify, that we are proposing and recommending that there is a reason for refusal capturing the absence of a legal agreement. It is just the, I'm not sure if Barry picked up on that, apologies, but it is just the wording which we do need to agree with the local ward members, so we are happy with that. But to move on, I'll quickly run through the remaining reasons for refusal on those suggestions.
I'm sorry, I caused some confusion. I'm happy with what Rachel said. Thank you.
So, starting with reason for refusal 5, as on page 21 of your agenda. That is a reason for refusal which is looking at the impact on neighbouring properties, which was mentioned in this discussion, resulting from the quantum and bulk of development. Let me just note a moment. So it sounds like you want that to stay, and I'll suggest that can more or less follow the same wording, with just a corrected reference to the MPCF at the end of that. And I would suggest that they do 5, 6, and 7 do stay a separate reason for refusal, because they are all slightly different. Councillor Mirralee's point just now about the bulk and its impact, I would say, is really picked up in reason for refusal 7, as you've correctly pointed out, that the reason for refusal 7 that was in your agenda didn't have policies at the end of it, and I would suggest that that makes reference to the same policies referenced above. So policy TD1 of the local plan, policy FMP1 of the Farnham neighbourhood plan, retain policies D1 and D4, the Farnham design statement, and indeed the council's residential extensions SPD would all be relevant. And just to confirm the point on condition 8, because the question was asked, and that was all about infrastructure contributions, it is correct that that reason does fall away following the introduction of SIL, that would not suggest maintaining that reason for refusal. We've been through reason for refusal 9 fairly extensively, and we would recommend a reason for refusal in that respect, and we can agree the wording. We would suggest that you do keep reason for refusal 10 on. This is all about affordable housing, and that will focus on the fact that at this point in time they have not secured the proposed affordable housing through an appropriate legal agreement. I think the following points that you've come on to were just mentioned about play space. That's reason for refusal 11 in the agenda from last time. I would simply suggest that we revise that to make specific reference to a local equipped area of play. That is what they are not providing on site and what they are reliant upon going off site for. And I think that was the specific concern about families having to go over the railway line into the town centre in order to access that development.
Can we just update the neighbourhood plan there, Rachel, while we're at it, because it still says 2017 and it's 2020 now?
Yes, I mean, what you see in your agenda has all got the policies which were in place at the time that the last reason for refusal was there, so there will be a few instances like that where we do need to update them. That's agreed. And so the other question, the next 2 points, which I'll take your steer on as to whether there is a reason for refusal, I would suggest that we do have sufficient information on biodiversity grounds to overcome that reason for refusal. And reason for refusal 13, we've already highlighted that there is a technical conflict with the local plan policy EE2, so we suggest that that remains. Please do tell me if there's any additions to that or if there's anything on that which is unclear. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think we've finally arrived somewhere.
Can we just clarify, did the officers say that we have sufficient information to not apply condition 12 in regards to biodiversity and impacts? Because we...
That's what I heard, yes.
We have added a condition. I mean, at the very beginning of the meeting, we were told that there's a supplementary number 26 or whatever condition that's been added to make sure that the ecological things are taken care of properly at a later stage. Yes, it was 26, wasn't it? A new condition. And we wouldn't have added that if we were in a position to say things were fine, would we? That's the point I made there.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hyman. One point to emphasise is that if it is possible to condition an item, then you should not be refusing it. What we should be refusing on is where we're not satisfied that a condition would deal with it. To touch on biodiversity very briefly, and don't want to go back into the debate, there is very little on site in terms of ecology. What is recommended are precautionary measures. They are fairly standard ones which come across the most sites. I apologise, it's my error that the condition wasn't in the first place. It's not a late change, it's an error that I've spotted since the agenda went out that wasn't in originally. So my suggestion to you would be that there isn't grounds for imposing a reason for refusal 12 in that instance. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we finally got there.
And employment use, the last one is 13 employment use. I think we maintain that.
I think we only got. Can we have for the reasons given, which I don't want to go through again, particularly, but I mean, but the reasons given, and in fact, I would ask the officers that the final wording is actually cleared, with, you know, with myself and the vice chair and the ward councillors. That this application refused. Those in favour of refusal.
Yep, that's unanimous.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Phew. Right. We move on. Hopefully, right. We now have two items which are not public speaking. The first being WA 2021-022 land at Aberdare, Balls Down Chiddingfold, GU8 4XJ, erection of extensions, demolition of existing garage, alterations to roof line and elevations at Aberdare, Balls Down Chiddingfold, GU8 4XJ, as amended by plans received on the 20th of May. Carl Houston.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Just wait for the presentation to be brought up. So this application is for the erection of extensions at Aberdare, Ballsdown, Chiddingfold, and the application has been brought to committee as the agent is related to a member of staff. Next slide, please. The location plan shows the host dwelling is situated in a residential area within the Greenbelt and AONB with fairly spacious plots and detached dwellings. Next slide, please. The aerial view shows the verdant nature of the surrounding area and the large spacious plots. Next slide, please. Photo A shows the front elevation of the existing dwelling. The dwelling is single story in stature, unlike the majority of the surrounding dwellings, which are 2-story. Next slide, please. Photo B shows the rear of the site and looks towards the adjacent neighbour to the east, which you'll note is 2-story. Next slide, please. Photo C shows the view from the front of the plot looking westwards. Again, the neighbouring dwelling is 2-story. Next slide, please. And photo D shows the site entrance, where again is a 2-story neighbour opposite. Next slide, please. So these are the existing front and rear elevations. You can see the outline of the proposed extensions on these plans, which helps to contextualise the additional bulk and mass proposed. Next slide, please. These are the proposed front and rear elevations. You can see the dwelling remains single story in stature, but raises the ridge and eaves and creates more space at ground floor level. Next slide, please. And these are the existing side elevations. Next slide, please. And these are the proposed side elevations. Next slide, please. These are the two floor plans. You'll note all floor spaces at ground floor and is within the 40% guideline of policy RD2. Next slide, please. So the main matters of consideration are the impact on the Greenbelt, the design and impact on AONB, AGLV and visual amenity, and the impact on neighbouring amenity. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody wish to comment on this debate? No? Yes.
Absolutely no issue with it at all. I think it's a sort of quite an ugly duckling and it's turning into something of a swan. So yes, I think it's an improvement and won't have any major effect on the Greenbelt or the AONB. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to comment? Wow. Well then, we can move to the recommendation. Subject to conditions 1 to 3 and informative, a decision for the application for permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against? Abstain. Okay, okay.
Mr. Chairman, for the sake of the webcast for people watching at home, can we make it absolutely clear
13
that...
for, none against and 1 abstention, as Councillor James did declare a pecuniary interest.
And again, comment please.
It's okay if I start, Chair.
Go ahead, Carl.
Okay, thank you. This application is for the erection of a single-storey rear extension and alterations at Broomfields Coach House, West End Lane, Frensham. This application is brought to committee as the agent is a councillor. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. The location plan shows Broomfields Coach House in its rural location and adjacent to and within the curtilage of the Grade 2 listed building Broomfields. Next slide, please. The aerial view shows the countryside and AGLV setting of the site. Next slide, please. Photo A shows the rear elevation where the proposed extension is to be sited. Next slide, please. And then photo B is a view to the east where Broomfields can be seen in the distance. Next slide, please. So these are the existing front and rear elevations. Next slide, please. And these are the existing side elevations. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed front and rear elevations. You can sort of note the single-storey rear pitched roof design of the extension, which is in keeping with the host building. Next slide, please. And here you can see the proposed side elevations. Next slide, please. And then this is the existing ground floor plan. Next slide, please. And then this is the proposed ground floor plan. Next slide, please. So the main matters for consideration are the impact on the listed building, the design and impact on the countryside beyond the greenbelt, AGLV and visual amenity, and impact on neighbouring amenity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Carl. All right, debate time again. Anybody wish to comment? Oh, Councillor Burley's.
Thank you, Chair. I know this house. My friends used to own it. They don't anymore, though. But the Coach House, actually, I think this will benefit it quite considerably. And I'm very much for this. That's all I can say, really. I don't see that it will have any impact, a visual impact, which will, you know, detract from the house itself or from the landscape behind it. So, yeah, I think this will work very well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Molyneux.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points. One, I agree this is a perfectly good application and I support it. Just a plea to the officers, whenever you show existing proposed elevations, could we see the proposed and existing of the same side every time? Then we can see very easily what the changes are. I was trying very hard to remember what the proposed was when I was shown the existing. So the older we get, the easier it is if we can see them at the same time. Thank you very much.
Recommendation that subject to conditions 1 to 2 and informative permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hand.
That is unanimous, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, there being no further items and there being no items to be considered in an exempt session, then no need for legal advice, and that concludes this meeting for tonight. Thank you very much. And
thank you, officers.
thank you.